What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. All right, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a big piece of news to talk to you about today. The NHC has tagged this tropical wave over here as an area of interest, and we're going to be talking about that and paying attention to that for the next few days. In the MDR, we also have potential another area to pay attention to in the next few days after this, as the Europeans have been kind of showing something else happening as well with a low pressure system. So with that being said, we have two big things to talk about today, and let's go ahead and dive right into them. So this is what we have right here. This has been tagged from the NHC. They tagged this last night at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So we now have a 20% chance of formation in the next 7 days. I was kind of looking at this. I was kind of saying, my guess was that they were going to either tag it late tonight or tomorrow. And well, they tagged it tonight. And now we can go ahead and read this out. So here we go. So we're also going to go ahead and give an analysis to that. But with that being said, let's dive right into it. A tropical wave interacting with a broad area of low pressure is producing disorganized showers and thunderstorms about 900 miles west-southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands. Environmental conditions are marginally conducive for gradual development of the system during the next few days as it moves westward over the northwestward, to northwestward, at around 10 miles per hour. By the middle of the week, environmental conditions are forecast to be unfavorable for further development. 48 hours out, we have a 10% chance of formation, and in 7 days, we have a 20% chance of formation at the same time. So we have quite a bit to go ahead and dissect because we got to look at the conditions, we got to look at the potential threats, because like I said, the Lesser Antilles do need to pay very close attention to this, because even if it hits you as an open wave, flash flooding is still a pretty big threat in my opinion, especially for those regions right there in the Lesser Antilles. So we're going to want to pay attention to that going forward. So going back to satellite imagery, as you can see, you're starting to see the system trying to get its act together. You're starting to see the system kind of slowly organizing at this current point. We can go ahead and move over to the central Atlantic just to show you this. But here's your tropical wave right here. That's located. It's going to be moving into a area of slightly better conditions before it starts to truly get its act together. But as you can see, it's an open wave. You're starting to notice a lot of convection. Right now, this is currently along the Intertropical Convergence Zone, or ITCZ for short. Once it detaches from the ITCZ, that's when it's going to be able to go gangbusters, and that's when the system's going to start potentially developing. But overall, you have a pretty decent amount of convection. You have a pretty good starter package with this, and you are noticing a slight amount of rotation with this. It's not particularly anything major or anything like that, but it is present. So that's something that with this, that's kind of indicating where the low pressure is. So you're going to want to keep a very close eye and pay attention to that very much so. Also, interesting to note, we're noticing a lot more convection everywhere along the ITCZ, even into parts of South America as well. As we can go ahead and pull up the surface obs to kind of get a closer look as to what's going on. So here are your surface observations right here that we're taking a look at. This is the Atlantic. Okay, never mind. They're not really showing that much in the tropics. We'll have to wait and see at their next update what's going on with that. But ultimately, what you're seeing with satellite imagery, and we can go ahead and show you the true color as well, satellite imagery has become pretty interesting with this. You are noticing a bit of an expansion to the north, maybe the start of a little bit of outflow over there as well, so that's something to kind of keep a close eye at. Now, I will say this, there is some dry air to the north of the system, same with wind shear to the north of the system. However, if the outflow in the system organizing can kind of stay in that moisture pocket that's in that we kind of highlighted the last couple of videos, and it stays south of that wind shear, and the outflow kind of gets picked up on that in that shear, then you're going to have a situation where ultimately this could potentially help enhance development, help the organization process a lot more, and we'll want to pay attention to that moving forward. But with that being said, we can also go ahead now and take a quick look at some of the charts. We can look at some of the probabilities of formation as well, and some of the ensembles, because that has been pretty interesting to say the very least. So taking a quick look at the tropical cyclone activity, we'll go ahead and move back to look at tropical cyclone probability formation. Now, granted, this is kind of nuanced. It does have some gaping flaws. Like I said yesterday, it only takes into account wind speed, not organization or anything like that. But ultimately, what you have right here is you have a bit of an increase compared to yesterday. You have 50 to 60% in a much more broad area in the main development region right here compared to what we were seeing previously, which was kind of 50 to 60% in like one small pocket. In fact, this is a pretty impressive, but at the 12Z run yesterday for the European, it was considerably bigger. That's okay. That's not 50 to 60%. I believe that's about it's close to 80%. Actually, right there, that we had a pretty big shot of development yesterday at this current point. We had like a 50, 60, 67. In fact, in some of the other runs, like I saw on weather models. In fact, I think I can pull this up. I can pull this up very quickly. I know Charlie sent this to me in the tropical chats right here. Taking a quick gander at trying to take a quick gander at that. Yep, here it is. Let's go ahead and pull that up. But yeah, taking a quick look at the charts, you did have an 80 to 90% probability of tropical development right there, probability of tropical depression. Again, it's very wind derived, so take that with a bit of a grain of salt right there. But you do have model support with the system that does have this closing off, have this tropical cyclone. So you're going to want to watch that as well. But basically, you saw these chances really increase at 12Z with the European, same with the 18Z data that came in as well. And that's why the NHC ultimately tagged this. Seeing this massive uptrend and this massive uptick in the probabilities is what really caused this to go up and really caused this to get tagged in the first place. And there's also some decent conditions that the system that currently is trying to develop is in, with the exception of the stuff that's happening to its north. And we can go ahead and dive right into those very quickly. So here is your water temperatures. Here's your sea surface temperatures. This is as of July 17th right here, but I think the point still stands. Where this is currently situated at is in an area of about 28 degrees Celsius of water. That's about 82.4 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you tuning in from the United States and Puerto Rico that don't use the metric system. But you're looking at plenty of warm water with this. Like 82 degrees Fahrenheit, that's well above the magic number for tropical development. The magic number is thought to be around 80 degrees, but sometimes tropical development can happen in cooler water temperatures, but that's kind of more of a rare type of situation. It can happen, but we won't need to worry about it in this instance. That's more of a subtropical Atlantic type of issue. Right there, but 28 degrees Celsius. As it moves to west, northwest, it's going to be in that 28 degree area, and then starting to move into 29 degrees Celsius waters as it continues to shift. That's about 84 degrees Fahrenheit for you right there. So that's even warmer waters as it approaches the Lesser Antilles potentially. So you're going to want to watch that as well. Taking a quick look at the OHC. OHC is going to be pretty important with this, in my opinion, mainly because you have a situation where it's not going to be moving that quickly. It's going to be taking its time. Okay, the latest charts aren't out yet for the OHC. It's going to take a little bit of time, but we can use what we have here on the 16th because the point still stands regardless. But taking a quick gander at the ocean heat content, where it's currently situated at, it's in an area of about 50 to 75 OHC. 50 to 75 OHC may not seem like that much, especially compared to what we have in the Western Caribbean and the Gulf, particularly in the loop current. However, 50 to 75 OHC is quite a bit for the main development region. That is pretty conducive for some pretty decent strengthening right there. Not necessarily rapid strengthening, although I have seen those scenarios happen. And in this case, that's not, in my opinion, going to happen. But you do look at that OHC, and considering the amount of time it's taking, it's kind of going to be moving around 10 miles per hour, which is pretty good. And it allows these types of systems to kind of tap into that OHC for its fuel. It's going to be pretty interesting to see how that happens, but what I will tell you is that as it moves further to the west, you do have an increase of OHC to about 75 to 100 as you approach the Lesser Antilles, but dry air and wind shear are going to be more likely in that area, which is why I'm not as concerned of this like rapidly intensifying or anything like that. Now, if this system starts to rapidly organize and starts to intensify before it hits those conditions, that we might have a bit of a different story, but we'll have to see how this system evolves, and we'll continue to keep you updated on that here in the Pat's Path Predictor channel. Now, taking a quick look at the wind shear right here, we're going to go ahead and start with that. And then the trade winds, just to kind of emphasize this more. But taking a quick gander at the wind shear, where this is at right now, in fact, this is where it's currently situated. There is some wind shear to its north right there, but it's not particularly that much as of right now. That wind shear is forecasted to increase somewhat, but it's likely going to stay to the north, and there is some shear to the south, but that could be attributed to like bias, like the winds from the cyclone and all of that stuff. We'll have to watch it, especially around like the immediate center of it. We'll have to pay attention to it. But ultimately, you do have some wind shear to the north of it. There's not particularly as much. This has actually decreased a little bit compared to yesterday. Yesterday we saw kind of more concentrated but stronger shear. Now what we're looking at right here is you're looking at less shear. You're still looking at relatively unfavorable shear to its north, but it's more spread out and it's kind of a lesser extent of that. And it's also just north of it to kind of allow for the outflow to get caught into that right there. Now, granted, shear does increase as it approaches the Lesser Antilles, but if the system can stay to the south of that and the structure doesn't start to get chipped away from that, this is going to be kind of this is going to be somewhat of a small system from what I've noticed. So if that core can stay to the south of it, it should be in decent shape, at least until it gets to the Antilles right there. But then you notice more shear starts to happen, particularly in the Caribbean. You do notice that shear does kind of fall off a little bit, and then the system arrives, and then you have a bit of a shear increase as you get to the Caribbean. But then you start to notice this, and I want to go ahead and move on further into the future with this as well. You notice how the wind shear in the Caribbean just gets a lot more fluctuative. It starts to collapse quite considerably, matter of fact, right here. And you do notice, like before, we were seeing like a more concentrated pocket of consistent strong wind shear with that. Now what you're noticing with that is more of a situation in which where the shear fluctuates a lot more in the Caribbean. That's an indication that the wind shear just pretty much across the Atlantic is collapsing. The MDR is showing less and less wind shear as time continues to move forward. And even after this system, you're looking at this, the wind shear continues to decrease and continues to be somewhat favorable for development as time goes on. Even as more shear does start chipping at it a little bit, you still have a pretty favorable environment. Like the wind shear that's in the MDR just completely collapses after a while, and that's going to continue, and that's going to spread into the Caribbean because now we're noticing less of a concentrated area, more fluctuative up, down, up, down, up, down, and that's something to pay attention to, especially after this system runs its course and heads towards the Antilles and does all of that stuff. We'll have to pay attention to the shear charts because, like I've said, and I feel like this area of interest has kind of validated this a little bit, we are noticing that like a late July to early August kind of situation where the MDR starts waking up and things start to roar awake. That's kind of where I was kind of setting the target right there. And now I can say that at least with this area of interest, it's starting to do that. That with better conditions as well in the Sahara dust a lessening in the region as well. That's kind of where the pattern was, and Weather Center Nazario and I were talking about this kind of honing in on it, and it seems that as of right now we can say that our predictions have verified quite a bit with that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move over to the moisture component to all of this. Moisture is going to be the biggest issue with this, but even still, as long as the system stays in that moisture pocket and stays out of that dry air to the north right there, you're going to have a pretty interesting situation. You're going to have a situation where the system could develop, could do some stuff, could strengthen a little bit, but dry air is going to be the main hindrance with this. And eventually dry air, at least according to these runs, is going to start entering the system, try to choke it out and all of that. But even still, if it holds on until it gets towards the Lesser Antilles, it does have less dry air to work with, and the dry air that kind of starts to surround it does actually can actually start to get mixed out a bit and not really entrain into the system. for a bit, and then as the system heads towards the Antilles, it crashes into more dry air as it heads towards the Caribbean as well, and that's pretty much the last little bit of it. Now, granted, that's not going to mean the wave is going to be over. That does potentially still cause a flash flooding threat for Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and those areas as well, but you're going to want to pay attention to that. But then you notice some more dry air, Sahara dust heading towards the Atlantic, but you also notice more of it is heading towards Europe, more of it's heading into France, the Iberian Peninsula, even back into Africa a little bit as well, as more moisture and another moisture plume starts to head towards the MDR, and you're noticing more of it starting to enter the region as well. Dry air is becoming less of a factor right here for inhibiting development, and you can also really reflect this in the precipitable water anomalies. Now, granted, there is going to be a bit of a pattern starting in the next 10 days or so where there is drier air than average in the MDR, but that's not going to last particularly very long. And I would say, like, this is a situation where that stays for a few days and then it weakens afterward. But then as you move on, but at least for right now, everything is above average in terms of its precipitable water. That's essentially a measurement of how, if you squeezed all the moisture in the atmosphere and converted it into rain, how much would you get? And you're still looking at 2 to 3 inches greater than average of rainfall potential than average, and you're still seeing these above average conditions, and that's kind of warranting why this is in a relatively, at least somewhat more favorable environment than it normally would be in this case, and why it does show signs of development right there. It's because it's in a better environment than climatologically forecast. Hell, it's even better in an environment than it was last year by a pretty considerable margin. And that's going to continue for the next few days. But then you have more dry air starting to move into the MDR that you're going to want to pay attention to. And you do have another moisture surge and then more dry air following. So it's going to be one of those fluctuative situations over the next few days, over the next like 2 weeks that you're going to want to pay attention to. So that's something to kind of keep a close eye on as well. So that's your precipitable water forecast for you right there. Looking at the trade winds very quickly at this current point, trade winds are going to be pretty interesting. The trade winds across much of the main development region in the Atlantic Basin, as well as parts of the Gulf, are still below average, but as you're starting to notice, you're starting to see an increased amount of trade winds across parts of the Caribbean and the Gulf region, so you're going to want to keep well, so you're going to want to pay attention to that to see how that pans out. I just wanted to show that very briefly and talk about that, because even after this area of interest passes, you're still going to see more and more warming across much of the Atlantic, and I want to emphasize that, because if you think that the water temperatures are already warm, expect them to continue to get warmer and warmer and warmer and allow for better and better odds of development from that factor. So that's something to pay attention to. Lastly, we can go ahead and show you the operational runs for this tropical cyclone right here. Let's go ahead and do that right here. So basically, here's what we have: the European, pretty consistent with the low pressure system. Now, granted, the strongest it gets is 1,008 millibars. That's around tropical depression strength according to the Euro. But the operational is catching up to the ensemble runs right here, and we're noticing a pretty consistent signal all the way until we get to the Lesser Antilles right there. And then it starts to dissipate. But then there's another potential for another low pressure system after this system, about 5 days out, as it moves into the main development region to potentially cause a brief spin up right there. We'll want to keep a very close eye on that. But that's kind of an indicator that the MDR is waking up for you guys. And then moving on to, I actually want to go ahead and pull up the ensembles right now, actually, and try to get the 0Z just to get some context with this. 0Z has been pretty interesting, although I will say it has kind of decreased in terms of its intensity a little bit. It's still pretty concentrated, don't get me wrong. It's just not compared to the 12Z. It has decreased a little bit in terms of its product right there, but that's something to pay attention to. And since the operational does have a consistent pattern on this, it's still a pretty big threat, especially considering the NHC has tagged this too. So we'll keep you updated on that here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to help out, hang out, or ask us some questions, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.